Hello, everyone, and welcome to And the Beat Goes On. This is episode 18. I can't believe we're 18 episodes in. That is a good indication of how long this pandemic has been going. And we are thrilled that today we have Issac Cates as our guest. How are you doing, Issac?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for being with us. I am so excited and pumped that you are with us. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We also have on the line with us Brittany Stanton. Say hello.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here.
Brittany is our Director of Education here at the Choir School of Delaware and our Assistant Director. So thank you for joining us today, Brittany. So today we are going to jump into it here. First, Issac, tell us, how are you doing in the midst of this pandemic? How are you doing? Just talk to us.
Yeah, I'm doing well. I think I'm doing I'm doing great now. I'm doing a lot better than I was. It's been a crazy time. I think it's a really challenging time for everybody in the arts. But I'm actually doing really well. I've gotten my creative flow back. That was paused a little bit. I guess I'm gonna go ahead and put it out there. I put it up on social media, but that was contract the disease, COVID, and was diagnosed with it on March 30th. I tested positive for it. So kind of ended up walking through that scenario and had to get on antibiotics and things like that. But and then I tested negative for it March 5th and the day after that. So I beat it so far. So I feel good. All my energy is back, and I'm back to making music and trying to stay encouraged.
Wow, man. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to have COVID, where you think you might have picked it up, just help us, better understand.
Mm-hmm. For me, actually, it really wasn't. It's weird to say, it wasn't terrible. The time that I had the flu, it was much worse in my adult years. Feeling, but the COVID it was interesting because I just was fatigued. I literally didn't. I was going to schedule. I get seasonal allergies anyway, so about 2 months out of the year or more, I'll just have this wheeze and cough or whatever, and just it's a whole thing. And so at this time of the year, I usually kind of get that in late spring kind of thing, and so I didn't think a lot about it. I had a cough, and but then I thought to myself, it's a bad time because they were closing things down. They were starting to talk about COVID. It's just a bad time to cough. It just felt like a bad time. So I reached out to my doctor who was on maternity leave. Couldn't see her, so I went to the urgent care that's connected to where she practices. And I saw a colleague of hers. And so it's like, yeah, well, your oxygen levels are good. And okay, this is okay, that's okay. Then your lungs sound okay. But then he took a chest x-ray and saw the infiltrate for the pneumonia in my left lung lobe, the lower. And he's like, oh, yeah, let me send it to a pulmonologist to be sure. And he said, yep. And so we caught it right when it was starting. And I did not feel bad other than being fatigued. I did lose my sense of smell and taste. But that was it, and had the cough. I didn't have shortness of breath, but I noticed I couldn't get as much kind of like diaphragmatic engagement that I would normally have. But other than that, it was cool. I mean, it was, and so I'm blessed. I'm really, really blessed. I think people need to really take it seriously. It's really, really contagious. I think when it depends on where it's at, how much you're exposed to. And to answer your question, I'm pretty sure when we did the contact tracing that I got it in a choir rehearsal. So,
Wow.
Yeah, pretty sure I can.
And tell us about did other folks catch it who were in the rehearsal? Did the others contract?
Yeah, so when you get something like this, the health department reaches out to you just to kind of, it's interesting. They like want to keep your privacy, but then they're like, where were you at? Because we need to call people and tell them, that you may have been in contact. And so I'm pretty sure that I got it at church. And there were, I think, about 11 of us at a rehearsal. This is the same week that the mayor had started to close things down and whatnot. And three of us, there were 11 of us in an ensemble at a rehearsal, and three of us ended up with it. The two other ladies are much older than myself. One was fine. She was like almost asymptomatic, and the other one ended up on a ventilator. She's fine now. She survived it, but it's very serious. It is very serious. It didn't, and we weren't sitting, and that's another thing, we weren't sitting close. We were pretty spread out. I actually have a picture from that night. It was in rehearsal. We're all kind of spread. We were not sitting close. So I'm pretty sure that's where where I caught it at, either there or at church prior to that rehearsal.
Or at church, right? Wow.
That's a possibility.
Wow. So even with social distancing, people have to be careful, when making the decision to return to sing. So thank you for sharing that with us. And I'm happy that you and everyone who was at the rehearsal with you, that you guys are all feeling much better now.
Yes.
So can you tell us, how did you pivot? Obviously you are performing a lot, you're concertizing, you're, leading worship at churches, ministering. How did you pivot during this period of time? What did you do? Did you go online? Were things just canceled? What happened?
Yeah, a lot of things were canceled. Everything, of course, is online. Everything has been online, and I've even done some online workshops. I was supposed to be in Melbourne, Australia. I think we're going to do something with that ensemble next month. But I've done 2 or 3 with one of a group of a wonderful choir called Solva Gospel Choir. Had me do a virtual kind of workshop thing with them, and that they're in Switzerland. And then there's another group from Montreal. Quebec, and a few other different places that have reached out. And so we've kind of done digital. It's weird, how it is. It's just because so much of what we do, especially when you're in a clinic or a workshop or whatever, it's interactive. So much of what we do, it's so strange, especially when you start singing. What we did was, because I do some vocal coaching as well, I took them through all vocalese and stuff like that. I kind of combine some really cool vocal warm-ups that I do with my group, with my singers. Some I got from the classical side of things, from choral music. Other ones I kind of made up, some little fly ones I made up on my own. And so I kind of took them through that. Of course, everybody's on mute on Zoom. I'd sing, put them in a place where either they can be in prime unison or the octave apart, and then we just kind of go from there. And assume that it's good. And then what we did was I had several singers in each section. They would sing whatever parts or whatever, and I would kind of give them some nuances, some things with regards to phrasing and emotion and all that good stuff. And so it's worked. I mean, it served. It was impactful because I got a chance to see them, and it was better than nothing. And so
Right.
It was strange, but so I've just been that's been the hardest pivot to make, but it's been good. It's been okay.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad that you were able to find a way to stay musical during a period when there's a lot happening and a lot of challenges. So bravo. What I want to do first, before we jump into the meat of our conversation today, is show folks a little bit of your work. This is a video that is from the Kansas City ACDA National Conference back in 2019, I suppose that was. And I know many of my colleagues have seen this. If you weren't there and you weren't there in the room when it happened, I just too bad for you, because you really missed out on an incredible session. So can you tell us a little bit about what we're going to watch with the Lacrimosa?
Yeah, you're getting ready to watch a song. It's actually, it's a song that I wrote, an original song called Take My Life, that's based on the musical content from the Lacrimosa, from Mozart's Requiem. And basically the idea was to utilize the Requiem, which is a memorial piece for the dead. This mass situation, but it's in memorandum. It's I use the analogy of what if, as a Christian or a person of faith, what if I died of my own will? What if instead of what I want for my life, I say, God, okay, I'm cool with that. Whatever it is, whatever you want to have happen, this is my lament. This is my petition for the death of myself. Using the translation of the mournful, the day of the dust shall rise, and guilty man is to be judged, therefore spare them, oh God. This petition, I said, well, what if that was a petition in a gospel song? What if, and so the first part we sing in Latin, text, and then we move on and sing some original lyrics that I composed, which kind of expounds upon that. And so this is us performing that live there for the opening concert. It was called the Kaleidoscope concert that we did with Allegro Children's Choir, Contorai, and also the Heartlands Men's Chorus.
Awesome. Well, here we go. We're going to check out this Take My Life, which quotes Mozart's Lacrimosa from his Requiem.
Great
So, just a really incredible, incredible performance that I will never forget it. I remember I was like, this is the blackest ACD has ever been in that moment. It was the best experience just ever. So just to get started, before we jump in on how you create this sound, tell us, who are you? Tell us about the Ensemble Ordained, how you got to where you are. Just fill us in on your origin story.
Yeah, well, my name is Issac Cates. I am originally born and raised in Kansas City on the Kansas side. I now live on the Missouri side. If you've been to Kansas City, you know that's the whole thing for us. If you're in Kansas or you're in Missouri, it's one city, well, technically two cities, but basically half of it, if you think theoretically, half of it's in Kansas, the other half's in Missouri. But born and raised here, and I started playing music when I was really young. I was 4. My mother made me take piano lessons, which I hated. I absolutely, I hated it. All I wanted to do, I didn't like it. It's true. But I had a talent for it. I could always harmonize. I liked singing. I liked creating. And which is interesting, I liked the piano lessons with my teachers. So I started with the traditional classical piano. I played all the standard, all those little, started with Clementi and Kulao and did the Hanon, which all my students hate, of course, now and Czerny, and I did all of that. And which I actually really loved that, which I just didn't like practicing. So, but then of course I was raised in the Baptist church here in Kansas City, and I would sing in the choir as well. And I think I started piano when I was 4. I started singing in the choir when I was young then too, maybe 11. Maybe even younger than 8 or 9, because I was in the children's choir, and I played for them. And then, but because of my classical background, I just delving off into kind of heavier stuff. So a lot of the things the children's choir would sing wouldn't require a lot of my musical prowess. So we would close church every Sunday. It's a pretty standard thing in a lot of Black liturgical movements to end with the doxology. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. But we did a version that was first written by Roberta Martin, which is just, if you've been to a Black church, it's just great. You know, it's this big thing, and we all stand in C sharp, and we sing, and we hold hands, and it's just great. We sing a threefold amen at the end, and it's just a big deal. And I was inspired by that song. And I remember once I learned how to play it, and the church didn't know that I was, because I only did a few things for the children's choir. My music teacher let me get up on the piano, Mrs. Porche. She died several years back. But she had me get on the piano and just and play that. I'd worked on that. I'd taken lessons with her, and everyone in the church was blown with it. Was like, wait, you're like in 12. How did you go from playing these little, everything had a little Alberti bass or a little trio underneath with the melody, and all of a sudden I was playing this, and they were just like, what happened? Whoa. And so that was kind of the start of it. And then so I played in many churches here in Kansas City through my teenage years. And then I eventually went on to study music at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And while I was there, I actually started my group Ordained with a friend of mine who was a classmate, Anthony Harvey. He was a music ed major. And I'd already started writing music also by then. I wrote my first song when I was 13 or 14, a song called God's Grace. Wasn't very good. But I wrote that song, and that started my songwriting and arranging. And so by the time I got to UMKC, of course, I'm being bombarded with all of the great choral music. And I was always interested in different styles. I like funk. My father loves Parliament. And so I grew up, hearing George Clinton, and I love jazz and R&B and Norman Brown and just all of the greats. And then of course I was singing in the choir, so I'd hear that. But then I fell in love with symphonic music, and that was right before I got in college. By the time I got in college, I think I heard Strauss's and Alpine Symphony changed my life. Like with regard to what you could do with the orchestra, I didn't know music could make you, like that sound could happen. And I think, around that time I started, just arranging and setting spirituals and just kind of experimenting with different texts. And one of the first arrangements that I did was of the Lord's Prayer, which is still out today. And I released that on the album in 2006. That was the first thing that was kind of led to my inspiration to do my own album. I didn't know anything about recording or whatever. I just knew I had creativity and I wanted to do the music, my songs that I wrote and the things that I composed. And so the group Ordained, like I said, I started with my colleague, Anthony Harvey, and it was his idea, actually. He was like, we should start a group. And I'm like, no, we shouldn't. It felt like a headache, you know what I mean? You know, a lot of singers, you know what I mean? And so, but I said, okay, yeah, let's do it. I said, okay, cool. And I don't have a deep story. I wish it was profound, and we didn't even pray. I won't even lie. We just said, we were friends at school.
We were like, let's get it together.
The name of the group, he came up with that. We were just sitting there around at St. James United Methodist Church. Like, we should call this group something. And we're just sitting around, Anointed, no. Such and such singers, no. And he looks up, he goes, Ordained. And I said, okay. I said, I like that. I said, okay, yeah, to ordain or to be predestined or to robe with priestly authority. I said, yeah, I'm good with that. And so that stuck. I asked the singers, each of the singers are all worship leaders, or some sing jazz. The young lady, it's Cammie, who, a little short soprano that was leading in the last one, she has a degree in voice from Avila. So she's classically trained as well. So there are a few, it's a melting pot of different musical backgrounds. The one commonality is that we all come from the church. I've had Seventh-day Adventists in my group, just some of everything, non-denominational, Baptist, Pentecostal, it's been some of everything, but that's kind of the story of where we, and ironically enough, the Lacrimosa, I arranged that and I released that in 2006 on the first album I put out called it's named, that's the title of the album, Take My Life. And I didn't think anything of it when I arranged it. I didn't think anyone would ever sing it or listen to it. I remember saying it was just what I felt inside. It was what my expressionism, it was my art, it was my creativity. And I was cool with that. I wasn't trying to seek any attention for it. I just remember we would go, funny story, we would go sing it at churches when we first started singing it. And we would sing it at services, and I would just say the Latin initially just to translate it for them, the Lacrimosa Dici, and they would think, we go to like Pentecostal holiness churches, and they would think I was speaking in tongues.
Speaking in tongues. They were like, oh, he's speaking in tongues.
Hallelujah. I was like, no, I'm not. No,
You're like, no.
That's Mozart. This is Latin. You're tripping. Let's take this, And so it was interesting. And then, so it and we got away from it. And I started writing more worship music and more contemporary gospel music. And about 2 years ago, I did a rehearsal because I had some new singers and we were reviewing some of the old catalog. I decided we took them through it, and I got my phone up and put it on and just, put a minute of us singing it, because I didn't realize for me to release it in 2006, there's a whole generation of people now that never heard it. It was independent. And so I put up a video on Facebook, and it got almost 300,000 views, and it was hilarious. I mean, people kind of took to it, and I was like, okay. And so everybody's like, oh, the gospel Mozart. And I was like, yeah, kind of, but so that's the story behind that.
Wow. That's such an interesting story. Now, what I want to spend a good amount of time talking about is how you create the sounds that you create. So in our national dialogue right now, there are two things dominating it. It's COVID-19 and then racial inequity. And so before we get into how we're going to create this sound, we need to better understand the history of gospel and where it comes from. Can you help enlighten us? So if there's someone listening that's like, I don't actually really know the history of gospel and like how it should be done and how to think about it, can you help us contextualize gospel in this art form?
Yeah, that's a large order. I could talk about that for an hour.
The mini version.
Well, the first thing I would always recommend is vet your sources. There are wonderful musicologists who will give you more information than you probably want to know about. A musicologist, ethnomusicologists as well. They could talk you through they could take you all the way back to West Africa, through slave songs and work songs, and then, spiritual, all of that. And so often people speak interchangeably about spirituals and gospel music, and it's not that, this ain't that sort of thing. I mean, spirituals, it comes way before gospel music. If you're talking about it from a genre standpoint or canonized work, really you're talking about, you have to kind of follow the Great Migration from like 1915, 1916, from the southern state when they were trying to get away from Jim Crow laws and segregation and all of that, and job opportunities and that sort of thing. And so that's kind of one of the impetus, because of course that gave birth to, that helped things like the Harlem Renaissance. Same thing with gospel music. And so when you follow that, you have the contributions of Christians who come from, because that's what it is. Gospel music is the Black experience of sacred music, basically, through the. And so as a result of that, when they migrated, they came to places specifically like Chicago, or parts of Brownsville, Illinois, and you get really, really important figures like Thomas Dorsey, who is considered to be the father of gospel music. And there are tons of things. He was a minister of music at a Pilgrim Baptist Church in Chicago, which burned down. But there's actually there is a museum that is currently in the working. Don Jackson, who's over the Stellar Awards, they're putting together a gospel music museum, history of gospel music, and it is in the place where that church once stood, which is considered by many to be the quote unquote birthplace of gospel music. But there are other figures there, Charles Tinley, Lucy Campbell, the Baptist Church commissioned some of the first writings of gospel songs that were put together. There's a book called Gospel Pearls, which is really, really, I think that came out in 1921. I think it was 1921, but it was commissioned by the National Baptist Convention. And so it's got a bunch of old songs in there, and you have some of those notable songwriters who contributed music to it. So Thomas Dorsey, he's just considered to be the father of gospel music. Of course, he wrote Precious Lord and so many other songs that we are really well familiar with. But I think also his contributions is that he organized. So like with Sally Martin, he helped to organize and gave a platform. Even though he was once a blues musician, he kind of gave that blues sound that we kind of associated with some of the chord progressions and with some of the rhythmic things. He helped to popularize that rather. And so I would say to people, if you can, to get an understanding of it, it is a lot. It's a lot to talk through because it has different eras, just like anything. I mean, I'm just talking about from like the early the beginning of the 20th century kind of thing. But even within that, because you move on beyond that to the golden era, into the 1940-ish, 1945-ish kind of thing on, and that gives you had a bunch of quartets and Dixie Hummingbirds and the Soul Stirrers, which is where Sam Cooke kind of came in. And so it's a lineage of things that you can, and then from there you move on into the 1960s, and you get the emergence of James Cleveland. And so I think, and he had his own workshop, and he came from Thomas Dorsey's workshop, the National Convention of Gospel Choirs and Choruses. So I would say, to not feel overwhelmed with information. It's a gentleman by the name of Bob Maravich. And he put out a book called A City Called Heaven. And it just came out, I think, a few years ago, but it's a chronicle of kind of the gospel music from Chicago, because we consider that to kind of be the birthplace. And so I would say start there. I would say also, to music educators, don't let it just be this nebulous gray thing. I know that there's not a lot of published information with regards to literature historically, from to kind of walk you through, but there are some things. Bill Carpenter, he put out the Gospel Encyclopedia. I think that's still in print, but it's a wonderful resource as well. There's, and I know people have maybe never heard of these things, but these are great. These will kind of give you context, because before you start approaching the sound, I think you need to understand the cultural significance of how gospel music was used in the church from and how and what its importance was, because you can actually still hear it in some churches. There are some wonderful churches all around the United States that still, especially that have really, really wonderful music departments, like Mississippi Boulevard in Memphis. There, Dr. Leo Davis, and a lot of these annual conventions still take place as well too. That I spoke about earlier. So, for instance, the Dorsey Convention, Gospel Music Workshop of America, that would have been going on this week, actually. That would have been going on this week right now, actually, here in Kansas City. And so, but they're alive and well. They're musicologists, they're historians, that are a part of it. There are professors. So it is not just this gray thing. I know that's a lot of information. I kind of tried to hit stuff that popped in my mind to kind of give context, but I think that's before you start approaching the sound, you have to get an idea of just the context so that it's not this amorphous gray thing, and that you just stop saying it's spirituals too, because they're not the same. And I think anybody, Dr. Thomas, I'm sure he would tell you that too. I know I saw you all had him, and he's there's nobody that would know more than him about it, and he's right. And so and I get people don't mean any harm by it, but I think just start by getting context. And that way, once you get a context and you get and a historical perspective, then you can start getting little gems from those eras. You can start listening to what the styles are, and then you can start putting your musical ear and your eyes, well, if they have a score, to something, you're like, oh, okay, this is what's happened. But I think it will take, if you're not familiar with it, and many people even in the genre themselves are not familiar with it. Not like I just talked through. We have time now here home, so I would say delve off into some of those things. And then also I mentioned the Gospel Pearl, but you have there was another book published 1981 or something like that, Songs of Zion. It was in every Black church, and it was not denominationally driven. There may have been more in the United Methodist, but you would see it. It's like a hymnal, and and they started incorporating gospel songs. So you'd see James Cleveland music in there. And then, of course, I think in 2000, GIA Publications put out Nolan Williams and Dr. Abington and all of them put out the African American Heritage Hymnal, which is even more up to date. And these are all great resources that you can go by today to at least look at the music. Then I would say, and the good thing about the African American Heritage Hymnal is they actually did arrangements of the music in a way that we colloquially do them. Whereas normally when you would see a hymn or you'd see whatever, let's say we did I Surrender All or something like that, we would have quite a few chord substitutions that you'd sing in the Black church that you don't see written on the paper. Well, they took great care to actually go and sort of, legitimately give you an interpretation that you would hear in a Black church.
Those are great. And thank you for those resources. So folks, we'll catalog these and we'll also link them later on our thread in case you're looking for any of these resources. Brittany, do you have any questions for Issac?
I do. I feel like many times gospel music is not embraced in the education world because there's such a strong religious connection that singing of gospel music is a religious experience. And so there's some fear around programming it and teaching it because you don't want to impose any beliefs upon anybody or whatever excuse there might be. But there's not the same kind of feeling about other music that has religious texts. So could you speak to that?
Yeah, it is. I think people are entitled to their own opinion when it comes to musical taste and the content in the music. However, I think we have to be careful not to be hypocritical. Unlike most gospel musicians, I've done a lot of because of the classical background, I know how involved. Nobody was a bigger church musician than Bach. I mean, I mean, it's just like when people are like, well, they do all this riffing and running. Okay, so recitative and opera is what? When you roll a chord and then the soloist flights of fancy and kind of, I'm just saying, I mean, and I kind of get that look, kind of like, okay, I think you know, I think we need to be careful not to distance ourselves from things just because it doesn't come from our background. Now, you don't have to. I'm a firm believer in you don't impose um, uh, your beliefs onto people, and you don't have to share the same belief system at all to enjoy the beauty of music and art. I think that's a mistake. You know, I mean, you hear I see Black women singing German lieder all the time about lyrical content that has nothing to do with being, you know, and so it's the art of it, and I think it needs to be legitimized as that as well. It's not, yes, it was birthed out of a spiritual component and a faith base. It is totally rooted in that. And whether you believe it or not, that's not going to take the power out of it. Neither does it make you wrong for having your own beliefs. And that doesn't mean that you can't enjoy the beauty of it as well, you know? So I have a more open mind, and because I teach so many, a lot of the work that I do is in Europe. I love, shout out to the Europeans watching. I love y'all. My people in Italy and all over. But many times I go there and I do workshops with choirs, gospel situations. I'm also a music missionary. And when I go, a lot of times the people are not believers. I mean, and I mean hundreds of people in these choirs. I don't mean like 50, I mean 400, thousands of people that come out to these concerts. I just toured Sweden at my first Scandinavian tour at the beginning of the end of February. And it was amazing to see how, and some of them are Christians, some are not. Some just love the music. And so I would say the teachers, when programming, program good music, you know, program good music that you have an understanding of. Even if you don't believe in a Trinitarian scenario, that's cool. You know, if you think there's substance, if it speaks about love, if it speaks about integrity, if it speaks about acceptance or forgiveness, or all of these amazing strength, endurance, these attributes that maybe we want to get something from, I'd say go for it. It's for everybody.
And can you tell us, when you're about to teach a piece of gospel, how do you approach it? Are you teaching mostly in the oral tradition? Are you starting, like, let's say you're going over to Europe, you're getting like, because the $1 million question is that a lot of folks want to hear, it's like, I have the choir of all white kids and I'm a white director. How do I bring authenticity to this performance? So how do you start off teaching when you're teaching, like, you know, folks who may not have grown up in the Black church or a gospel tradition? What do you do to start? How do you approach it?
The very first thing I let everyone know is that it is for you. It's for everybody. It is not, you know, and I try to, before, you can't teach people who don't trust you. You cannot. It's the same with children, animals, everything. There has to be some amount of trust established. And I think people need to know that you care, that you're knowledgeable, but that you also love. There's some love that comes from you, and that you have something to communicate. And I think, so when I start off, so for instance, let's say I'm going to another culture. I never disrespect them by, you do what I say. I mean, we may get there by the time I'm done with it, do what I say, but by then they want to do what I say, you know what I mean? Because we've had a connection. So for example, I did a workshop in Leipzig, Germany, a couple years ago. And I mean, of course, what classical musician doesn't want to go and see St. Thomas Church and hang out where Bach was and stuff? And so it worked out double thing for me, because I'm there doing gospel stuff. We got to do classical stuff too. And so I worked with the singers, and we were talking about pronunciations, you know, because they have, you know, Europeans have a hard time with some of our words and some of the diction and some of the things that we sing, especially English language. And so I used, for example, for them, I was very demonstrative, especially like English isn't their first language, and they're being kind enough to speak it while I'm there. And so I'm like, okay, this is pronounced like this, or you're going to sing it like this, or you're going to say this phrase like that. And I use that and what I do, and in that example, I said, okay, the name Wagner, I said, 1, 2, 3, how would you all pronounce it? Everyone in the room, Wagner. Okay, got it. I said, so now if an American that didn't know Germanic pronunciation or study music, they may just pronounce it Wagner. They all busted out laughing. And I was talking about, and I said, which one is correct? Which one is, and in this instance, they go, us. He's from here. I said, right. Yeah. I said, I would agree. Right. I said, so it's the same situation. So if I respect your culture and your pronunciations based upon that, I said, you should respect, and they're like, oh, you know what I mean? And so I start there, just establishing trust. And then I just kind of try to give them the emotion and talk about what the song is about. Whatever song I'm going to teach, a lot of it is, some of it is written down. A lot of it just depends on where I go. So if I'm in Europe, a lot of times I try to send scores ahead of time. It just depends on the situation. A lot of it is because it comes from the oral tradition. A lot of it is do what I do. You know what I mean? And there is a lot of that ear developing piece of it. And so I try to break down any barrier. And I think this works really when you're teaching anything, not just gospel music. I think once you like establish trust there, the connecting part is a lot easier. So if I'm teaching something, some gospel music, and people that feel like they cannot connect to it, the first thing you have to tear down in their minds is that they can't connect to it. The first thing they're like is, I can't sing this. I'm a white person or whatever. I can't, or I don't know how, I can't sing like her. She's, all this stuff. I can't do it. And I'm kind of like, it's okay. You do you, and so that has a lot to do with it initially. And then I think the more work you put in ahead of time, preparing for that, especially if you're trying to teach something gospel that's not something that you regularly do, you may have to put a little bit of extra time kind of scrutinizing what the recording was versus what the score may or may not say, versus what your ensemble can do. Because a lot of gospel music, of course, moves in parallel motion, and the voice ranges are super high. The style of singing is totally different. If you're singing choral, we're using all these tall vowels and space. And so I think being able to use your language to get it across, though. Music teachers don't shy away from being a music teacher just because you're teaching gospel music. You can still teach good technique. One of the biggest, gospel music can ruin your voice. Any genre can ruin your voice if it's sung incorrectly. Mm-hmm. I know more opera singers with nodules and polyps than gospel singers. So, anyway, but,
yeah. I mean, like, I feel like it's a stereotype, and like, part of having these conversations is to dispel these stereotypes and tropes of what gospel music is and isn't, and to really kind of decolonize technique, because like technique is not just bel canto. Yes, the voice is going to work in a certain way, because the voice, no matter where you are, is going to, of course, follow the same principles of biology and physiology. Nonetheless, you are correct that like good technique is good technique, and it really does surpass genre. So with that said, with these high, particularly tenor parts, how do you have any recommendations for us? Because gospel music is tertiary. So first, I always like to tell people, if you see SATB, it's probably not, someone is arranging that. That's not the real thing usually when you see 4 parts in a gospel arrangement. So usually it's a really high tenor part. How do you navigate that with choirs that might not normally sing gospel? Like, do you try to transpose things? Do you teach them how to sing or navigate in that area? How do you handle that?
Yeah, I'm very realistic in that. I think that's where the teacher side of me kicks in, and I don't ever want somebody to do something that can be damaging. This is when it's anything's damaging when you try to go. If you try to go outside, if you try to go work out and lift 50-pound dumbbells, and you have never done that before, let me know how that works out for you. If you're not conditioned to get there, you see what I'm saying? Before you do the heavy lifting. So if they're trying to sing a G or an A flat or something above middle C, absolutely not. I mean, unless they've sung in chorus or have I mean, and I can even relent on the modification of how we sing it in a way that's healthy. Like it's a give and a take with that. If they can get it, I mean, because really, if they can get it, I mean, that's just, I mean, I can do some stuff with the voweling and the formants to kind of finagle the ear to hear what I want them to hear. But if they don't have the technique to get up there and they're not used to being there, then I absolutely will just that's the good part about gospel music, is that I can just totally create a baritone part or a tenor 2 or split the harmony or have them or write in. I mean, that's another thing I would say to music educators. A lot of the music, when you go down, when you start delving into this music, it is certainly tertiary. It is very much, it moves in parallel motion. It sings in a higher part of the register a lot. But I will say, do what works for you. It is okay to find an arrangement and then stretch them gradually to get to that. You have to work up to it. And I think also where the keys, the center, the key that it's in, and you know what I mean. I think. I think most music educators have learned enough about the voice and the restrictions, the limitations, and the advantages to where you can gradually start to stretch that, just like you do in vocalese. The whole idea is to warm the voice up top to bottom and middle, right? And so it's the same thing with the rep that you pick. Maybe transpose the key and put it in a place where you can gradually stretch them to where you may want them to be. That's an idea. And then don't be afraid to alter the score for your voices. I'd say do what's healthy first, and then if you discover that you can expand that capability in a way where you can sing a lot of this stuff, how it was done. I'm finishing an album right now. I know some of these pitches. People are gonna be like, "What?" But it's my group is used to singing it. I mean, they're used to, and I've gradually over time. Also, you're not going to be able to clinic or workshop that kind of technique into as a guest, conductor. For instance, it's not going to happen. I mean, that's the job of the music teacher. Like that's going to take time. That does not come overnight. Just like anything else, you know what I mean. That's not going to take. But it can be. You can definitely you can see growth. You can definitely see the growth. But it's. I think you need to be really careful with that.
And can you give us some kind of tools that we can use to really, when we're talking about this, like when we're talking about ordained and what we listen to, that's in this contemporary gospel style. What are some things that we can do with the vowels or consonants to create a really authentic sound? Like, what are some things that we can do? What are some of start with kind of the low-hanging fruit of things that choir directors can do with their choirs to enhance the authenticity of the performances?
Yeah, I think if you study I think first listen. I think that's the very first thing is go and listen to gospel music in its authentic form first. Don't even sing, just listen. Go and listen to Reverend James Cleveland's Peace Be Still. Go and listen to some albums of some traditional gospel choirs, and then even see how it moved 60s, 70s and into the 80s when you had a huge mass choir thing. There are videos up. I'd say just go listen to enjoy first, find out what you like, and then go back and listen analytically, and really put some critical analysis and kind of try to and then have some conversations with some people also who do both worlds. That is a tremendous help. Having vocal pedagogues that can do gospel music, which they exist now, I'd say have the conversation. One of the things that I tend to do is I talk through voweling a lot. I use IPA. I use a lot of vowel modification. I do what's right, and then I do what I want, and so that's kind of like even with the Mozart, I wanted us to have at least a pretty authentic pronunciation of the Latin, and at least have an understanding, because I've sung the entire Requiem, from the Kyrie on down, and so I wanted to have that authentic first. So do the same thing with gospel music. I know that you all had the conversation about dialect. What's her name, Dr.
Felissa
Barber.
I'm so excited about her book. I think she's a rock star for that, because it is so. That's a great. Because a lot of these things are colloquially still covered. They've gone down. They've come down. They've passed down even to this day. And so one of the things that we do in gospel music is we whereas in choral music you don't sing like you speak. Don New and I don't sing like I speak. And in gospel music sometimes we do, and we use a lot we use a lot of exaggeration as well, and then sometimes darkening of the vowel. the way we handle neutral voweling is something. I think listening to just start off straight tone and just get the idea of the choir, and then see if you can control where your vibrato happens, and when not happening. Yeah, so for me, like with ordained, it's weird because I use a hybrid, you know what I mean? And then I'm a singer as well. So I do probably more singing than a lot of choral directors would, dig, like, how you don't really sing a lot for your students. I do. For when ordained, I'm like, sometimes I'm like, no, I really want this specific sound. And I'm pretty demonstrative about that. But yeah, I would say sit down with it, with whatever piece or song you're going to do or whatever, and just make some decisions before you even go into it. Maybe find a recording of a version that you like, or make some, you have to be informed at least how it was intended. So if you can find the original recording, that's even better, because especially if you're talking about music that only was popularized from 1915, 16 down, you can go to YouTube and hear, a lot of the original recordings, so you can have something to compare it against. You see, I think that's really, really important. And then sit down and make the decisions. And I like performance practice. I really write up how I want, the voweling, where I want a long air short. I really, really, I get the mini gospel people won't do that. I think that's the more classical side of me coming in. But but that's what you can use. You have that. And so as opposed to distancing ourselves from it, or just being like, all right, come on, let's do some gospel stuff. Put some intellect to it. Put the same amount of detail that you put in preparing Brahms. You know what I mean? Whatever it is, you're going to put the same amount of time into it. And I think you'll discover that you can really, really, you can make the same magic that you hear when the choir sing Ola Yellow or, Eric Whitaker or whatever, it just is to put the same mindset to it. And then figure out, the other element I would say is for your accompanists, because they may give you some feedback because they're going to be like, I can't play this. And they're going to have to stretch too. And if you only ever program a gospel song, and then a lot of the music is incorrect, it's true, it's not you can't write some of the things that are there. So that may mean your accompanist has to expand as well to kind of get that into their hands. You know what I mean? And you may even have to add an extra instrument or two, so.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. There's one thing that I also want to tease out, which I think is a really important point for those who are looking how to really be great practitioners of gospel music. This concept of dark and light vowel, bright vowels, dark and bright. One of the things about the Lacrimosa that we played earlier is that the beginning is exactly what you were talking about with that over darkening of the vowel. So if we were to sing the Mozart Lacrimosa, it would be Lacrimosa, right? But much darker in the gospel style, Lacrimosa. And then it opens up to be so much brighter in the Take My Life kind of section. And as it gets higher in the voice, it's really interesting because there's less vibrato and brighter vowel colors as the kind of piece expands and the range of the piece expands, which I think allows a lot of the singer's formant to be heard in the resonance and the overtone series to really come out. So when you're doing darkening and kind of doing it like an over darkening and over brighten, how do you decide when you're doing that?
Yeah, for me, the text. Whatever it is I'm trying to, so at the beginning, Lacrimosa dice la quare surge dexavila judicandus, omoreus ugergo parcidus. So, mournful the day the dust shall rise and guilty man is to be judged. I mean, it's already got this sort of wonderful macabre kind of, Mozart has those sopranos in the sky in the beginning, I was like, let's not do that. Let's bring let's crunch that harmony down and let's make it move in parallel motion and make it gospel. And so that was one of the things that I did. But then just the sound of it, I wanted it to sound mournful. We get the word lacrimosa derives into the word lacrimate, which means to cry or secrete tears. And so I wanted it to feel heavy. I love
Yes. Yes.
musical. I love it when musical dynamics exemplify or uplift or enhance um, the text that your intention. And I think once again this works in every genre, but specifically there because we're singing and it should have a mourn. And even when I talk to my singers, I remember about that when I taught it to them, and they'll tell you I fuss sometimes, like I like try not to be all preachy, but fuss. And I'm like, guys, you're not about to just be up here waving your hands around, singing. Oh, I said, no. I said, this is a serious thing, And I hit them like a side of bricks. It's like, imagine this is one of your loved ones who's died, or imagine this is something in memoriam to you. Or and you don't want people standing up there doing jazz fingers and being all, overly dramatic. And they were like, oh man. And once because I'm really firm about that, even with adults. And my group is all grown. I mean, everybody has jobs, careers, families, and stuff. And so, but even in that, I'm like, look, let's take this music seriously. Let's not. And so that once they got the meaning and they got what I was what my intention was. That made sense for them. And so it does lighten, especially once we go to the part that I composed, because it still has a little more repetition. Then it goes on to the vamp where it says, where you lead me, I will follow. Because then it's kind of like relenting. It's like a breath. It's like, okay, if you say so. And we literally saying, if you say so. And then when we do that, the harmony goes into this fortuitous, and then we sing really high and it brightens. And the whole idea is like, okay, now this is new life on the other side of that. This is me lamenting my will, my ideas, my life, whatever it is. Now the gospel side, because that's where the good news, the gospel part comes in, it has to brighten. So even it ends, and I think it ends with like that Picardy third in D major, and so all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, we've come somewhere else with this, and so that's my mindset behind that. And in everything that I do, I just believe that's really important. I think you should think of, I don't know, what you're trying to convey, hues and colors and emotion, atmosphere that you're trying to connection. I mean, of course, all these things come after you've done the work. If if it's count singing, if it's pronunciations, if it's whatever it is, if it's I don't care, Bible study, whatever you need to do, if it's studying, to make it to where it's real to people. I think that helps.
And can you talk to us also about consonants? That's the other thing that strikes me. So, like this is really interesting between like one of these days, we should have you and Phyllis on the same call so we can talk about this dialect thing, like consonants. So a lot of times in the spiritual tradition, we soften the consonant at the end of a word or leave a consonant off of the word, like hand is hand, right? And then in gospel, a lot of times we're putting a punctuated consonant in a place, and you can hear that in the La Crimosa, su, ret, g, right? So we can hear all of those consonants really at work there. Can you talk to us about how we might place consonants and think about them?
Yeah, I'm reimagining, since that was a reimagining, of course, if we were singing it, just the original, I really wouldn't maybe go as far. I would do some of that. Some of it I would do, but maybe not, as I'm painting, I think that's my artistic side that comes out. I think you need to do what's smart for the phrase. Depending on what language you're singing in, but for gospel music, a lot of it is percussive. A lot of it is punchy. A lot of it is glottal in nature. Like it smacks you in the face. It is high intensity, a lot of times from beginning to end. Once again, I'm kind of that weird hybrid in that I don't like to hear that the whole time. Like I love the nuance, the spectrum. You know what I mean? I want to hear night, then sunrise, and then, and so dynamically, that's one of the things. And so when I'm going through consonants, just depends on what we're singing and what I'm preparing. A lot of times it has to do with where the phrase is going and where I want them to breathe at. And so if a lot of times I will displace sometimes the end of a consonant, of course, to the beginning of something else. Or I will add an exaggeration. This is a new song that is going to be on my new album called Almighty. And what are we singing? We say a line where it says, "Tell me who can stand before us." So they literally, I have them sing, tell me, with the end, who can stand to be. For no reason, I have them putting the before us. Well, that's not true. It's not for no reason, but it has some notes that we actually sing.
Yes.
So instead of just singing before us, so it's little things that you can touch, you can add to the beginning or at the end, which will also affect, your consonants. And then just think
and
about
with no, I was just saying, and right there, even when you saying before us, like there's a little bit of an M.
Yeah.
Like
yes,
that before, like a lot of times, like people don't realize that you can use these other consonants before a traditional conference, like a consonant. So there was a little bit of an M before you saying that before us. Before us. Instead of before us, right? By putting that little M in it, it really makes a huge difference.
Well, not only that, but the M, there's a note that's happening too. Instead of B, they're
Voice
going
consonant, right?
Before us, So by them having to sing before us, by that, it just gives a little bit more flavor to it. It wouldn't be as fulfilling to go before us, I guess you could go B, but it felt, especially.
It doesn't feel right.
Yeah. Well, and then when you start getting into, because I record music a lot too, just sibilant, it can be tricky. It can just be tricky. So.
Absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. Can you talk to us about scooping? That's the other thing. I hear in performances, some that have no scoops, some that have too many scoops. Let's take what's something that everyone would know, a total praise, right? So the beginning, we can go, Lord, I will live, or Lord, I will. How do you decide when to do the scoops and when not to? Can you talk to us about how do you make those, how do we make those decisions? Yes, we can listen to choirs, and all choirs will do it a little bit differently, but as the conductor, how should we be thinking about making these decisions?
That's a great example for you to use. I mean, one, because Richard Smallwood is a dear friend of mine. He's like uncle to me. He's an amazing person. That in that particular instance, you have the fortunate aspect that he did a brilliant recording that came out in 1996 called Adoration. And I would say, don't listen to other people's version first. Go listen to Richard Smallwood in Vision, not in C major, in C sharp, and go listen. And he's one of the first gospel artists to publish his own scores and things like that. So you can actually see the parts that he intends for you to sing harmonically. So you don't have to change it. You don't have to guess. And even if you do revoice it in a way, I'd say go study. There was an artist folio out when he was studying. You can still get it anywhere. I think when he was at Zamba Music, I'd say go listen first. On the recording, they don't scoop. They just crescendo. It sounds kind of like they do, but I think they just open the sound. And so I would say, on that, for instance, I wouldn't scoop. I would crescendo, but I wouldn't scoop. And even that, even better, there's a video that went viral of him maybe 2 or 3 years ago teaching. If you just Google Richard Smallwood teaching, and I think it had hundreds of thousands, and I think he was at Mount Zion Baptist Church in Nashville. He taught that song from beginning to end. So, and he's still alive and well. So, I'd say reach out to him. He's wonderful about responding back to people. And so I would say find out what his intention is. You can do what you want. Of course, you can make it but I'd say first, make sure, because you remember this. There's historically really funny. People sing a fully diminished chord. The tenors do this B natural a lot of times in the black church. On heels, they do a B natural down to B flat, and it's supposed to just be a B flat dominant seventh and just stay there on the B flat. It bothers him to know, and unlike most gospel musicians, he speaks the language of music, so he can tell you what he wants. I mean, he's really, and he would laugh if he saw this too, because we've talked about it. But I would say just a great example. Find out just do the research and find out what happened. Especially with gospel music, so much of it is recorded. Unfortunately, a lot of it is not written down. Richard's case, that's not the case. It is written down, and then you've had a bunch of derivatives from there. So I would say start with the original. I mean, why on earth? I mean, I love Long Long's playing, but if I can go hear Rachmaninoff play his own, piano concerto number 2, whatever, hey, let me check that out too. Let me start there, and then or if I can, I look at that. Right. If I can go hear, I don't know, Bobby McFerrin, I want to hear where it started, the genesis of it, and then everybody else's interpretations after that are great. I mean, you think of, I'm a songwriter as well, so you think of A Song for You, the Donny Hathaway song, made really popular. Leon Russell wrote that. Donnie's version became the definitive version that everybody kind of goes to and on the R&B side, but Leon Russell wrote it, and you can watch videos of Leon Russell singing it and even talking about it. And so that way you can at least get, and then also you can get an intent for get a mindset for what the composer's intent was. Some of them don't care. Some are like, and then other ones have an idea of what they want you to experience as you perform their music. So. And
a question for you, that I think that's a really great piece of advice to kind of go back, when you're on J.W. Pepper looking for arrangements or wherever one goes, and you're like, hey, I need an arrangement, I need notation, I don't feel necessarily, I want a map and for me, and so I can go teach this piece. How do you know what is a good arrangement to choose? How do you know that you're purchasing an arrangement that is going to set you up for success? Are there any things that people should look for, or how does one know? I often think when I buy a piece of gospel music, I'm like, well, I already knew the piece, but I just needed something for the accompaniment, and then we'll kind of shape it. But I also think if I didn't have the experience growing up in the Black church that I had, I don't know how I would necessarily, with so much to choose from, how do you know what's good?
I would say follow arrangers and composers who already have a track record for it. I'd say either one of two things. It's 2020. And so if you're a composer, we need to be able to hear your music. I mean, there's just no reason, why we can't hear it somewhere. I'd say be able to listen to sound bites, or as you look at the score, and then you can scrutinize it. Well, I don't like this that much, or whatever. I think you should be able to hear. And I think J.W. Pepper's done a pretty good job of, of at least having representation of the songs. Maybe not always the most authentic, but that's a whole other thing to go down. Some things are amazing. But I just think if it's for instance, composed by somebody that has their own group, just use their group. I mean, we wanted Moses Hogan Chorale. Who's going to sing it better with an intention better than when he was conducting them,
Right.
And so that's just my opinion on that. I'd say use people that have a track record. Rollo Dilworth, he's got great music. You know what I mean? He's got great arrangements, and so for instance, you're looking for young voices. He understands the young voices, and because a lot of young voices will not be able to gospel music. And if you notice, you don't have a lot of really famous children, treble, youth gospel choirs. I mean, where? You have Mississippi Children's Choir. You have a few that sort of showed up, but it's it wasn't a lot of, it wasn't as big of a thing. It was some in the 80s, but it wasn't. And so a lot of the music that you're going to want to do, you're talking about people that recorded this music when they were in the prime of their voice. you know what I mean? Or, you know, adults like 30, 40, you know, years old. And so it's like, you know, so you got to kind of use some wisdom with that. So I would say vet it and make sure that it's someone and then some of it, sometimes you may have to do some work on your own. And when I say that, you may have to find a recording or something that you like. And let's say that you can't find, there's a pretty well-known gospel store called End Time Gospel Music. I think it's out of Charlotte, North Carolina, End Time. And they carry a lot of things that maybe you don't get printed everywhere. But if you can't find it, you may have to reach out to an engraver, which they exist. I have great ones that work with me all the time. And you have people that are great with Finale and Sibelius and transcriptionists and whatnot. And you may have to have a budget or, you know, get a hookup or something, find a way to get the music transcribed. And even in some cases, transcribed, and you may have to sit down and even look at the voice ranges. And you may have to put in a key that works for your ensemble or your intent as well. So that I would say you may have to do some of the homework on your own with gospel music, because some of it is not in print. It's not like you can go get an octavo for some of the stuff. Some of the older things you can. And then it's kind of like they did artist folios. The record labels would do them for a while. And that was kind of a big thing from the late 80s into the 90s. And then it just sort of fell off. And you can't hardly get, you're lucky if you can even get a chart nowadays to most gospel music. And I mean, these are Grammy Award winning artists. Some of them don't. It just doesn't come, and it doesn't come up because a lot of the musicians in the churches don't read music. So traditionally did not in the Black church. So.
And I just always like to tell people, I'm really grateful that you mentioned like reach out to a transcriber. Like you can reach out to the recording artists. Most of them will be thrilled to hear that you want to transcribe their piece. If you're, I think it's a great way. I know a lot of people signed to the Black Music Matters, petition, and part of that has to do with commissioning Black composers. But I also feel like a big part of that can be, let's write down some of this great music that already exists. If you don't have the budget to go out to a composer to write a new piece of music for you and for your choir, it might be a lot more affordable just to have something transcribed and then edit it for your purposes. And I wish that more of our colleagues would look at that as a viable option. Of course, we want to continue to commission new works, but I think we all have to work together to be able to make this rich gospel genre accessible to everyone. And I think, that's a great thing we can do is get people to edit and transcribe for our choirs. And it's a wonderful, affordable way to really champion the music of Black artists. So I really do hope that people will consider doing that. So we are all out of time for today, but if you could leave us with a last word or two about what we should be thinking about with gospel music and how we can kind of bring this to students, to our community choirs. What would you have us, think about or, ruminate over?
That's a good question. I think I'm just basically that it's for everybody. And then to remember that you cannot teach that which you don't know, so don't beat yourself up. If you don't come from this background, if you don't know it, learn it. I mean, it's not an indictment. It is not and unfortunately from something, because it comes from the Black experience, which in America, we know what that is. There is some systematic things in place that have been in place that are just now starting to lift, that have somewhat stamped out or quieted some of the reverberant awareness that you would have known. So don't beat yourself up, music educators. Chill. I promise you, the fact that you care and want to program the music and want to do it authentically and in a way that celebrates the culture and enriches people, your heart is already in the right place. Just get education behind it and fall in love with the music. Don't be so cerebral about it. You know what I mean? I mean, Bach counterpoint, it's gonna take you there you're totally gonna be mind you got to step away from it. You know, when we were all studying that, it's the same thing with this music. I mean, you can't just take it in overnight. You know, I would say go find major contributors, find the things about it that you like, maybe identify things that you don't like, but understand that there's a message in it that could be really uplifting, especially in the times that we live in. Even for people that are not believers, we are living in a time where people need faith in something, even if it's just hope that things will get better. And therein lies the power, essentially, of gospel music. Music, really, but specifically gospel music, is supposed to be the good news, as we believe this, of Jesus Christ. And so even if you don't believe in that scenario, you have to believe in the power of love, and you have to believe in the strength of hope, you know. And so understand that if you're going to share this music, give it some time. And please don't approach it with an elitist mindset, or casting it away as if it's some nebulous sort of thing. You know what I mean? Just fall in love with it, or not. I mean, but at least be informed. You see what I'm saying? The more about it you know, you're like, oh, you know what? I love this artist. Oh man, I love Andre Crouch's music. Oh, I really like the Hawkins family, or Milton Brunson, or Richard Smallwood, or Thomas Whitfield, or all of these amazing, or go back and Rosetta Tharpe, and all these great, I mean, they're just, you can go on and on. And I think what you will discover is that you will connect in some way with some of them. Some of them have amazing stories too, as well, the things they overcame. And so humanize it, don't distance yourself from it. Don't beat yourself up for not having, you know, having the most knowledge about it, because how could you, you know? And so start today. That's what I would say is these kind of conversations start the ball to rolling, and everyone hang in there too, by the way, you know, like hang in there.
Yes.
Make it through this. The world is you're here, and there's purpose in you and your life and stuff. And I'm an encourager by nature, so I have to do that. Thank you, music teachers. You make the difference in the musicians. We rock, okay? I'm just saying, there are kids and young people all over the world who are depending on you and your craft, and you to be knowledgeable and compassionate and available and present and relevant, and all of these things. And so keep that in mind as you make music. Share love.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Issac. If people want to catch up with you, where can they find you, and where can they find your music?
Yeah, they want to catch up with me. My Facebook is Issac Kate. It's a lot of people on that one. That's my personal one. So if you write me or whatever and I can't see it, I don't give up comment on something else. You can follow my official page, Issac Kate's Official. You can, if you want any of my music, it's on iTunes, on Amazon. We have stuff on YouTube. I have a vocal warm-up CD. For those of you all that are interested in that, that's online. You can Google that and use that as a resource if you want. And I have a website, www.issackatesmusic.com, where you can reach out to my team and find out more about what I'm doing. I'm working on a new album that was supposed to come out this year. It will probably end up coming out into the top of next year. But had a lot of, it was live and had a lot of great moments on it. So I'm super excited about that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for meeting up with us. And this was such a pleasure. For folks who are looking for resources, we've posted some things in the chat so you can catch up with Issac, so you can do some more reading as well. Thank you, Brittany, for joining us as well for our conversation. And we'll see everyone later. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Appreciate it.